so hope that works. So first off, sorry I didn't get a foray this weekend. I had other things going on, but hopefully we'll get something going next or this coming weekend. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we've got the fair coming up, and we should have 5 or 6 forays that weekend, and there might be morning forays and afternoon forays, and we're trying to spread them out. If you can't make a foray, but you might be able to make it to the fair, feel free to go walking in, somewhere near you. Pick some of the mushrooms you see, and you can bring them to the fair, and maybe we can add those to the table as well. All right, so let's get into the virtual table here. All right, first one submitted by Suma Singh. This is, I've seen a few pictures of these, so these are popping up. This is one of your larger puffballs. You can see it's kind of got this large sterile base. If you look at this back side here, it kind of looks like the back of a skull. So I believe this may be Calvaisha craniformis. There's a couple puffballs that can look like this, but hey, it's October, so we're gonna go with the skull shape since it's almost Halloween, right? So one of the main things that you could definitely help to determine if you've got the right one is the spore mass when it starts developing. This one would have more of a greenish, yellowish color, and the other Cyathoformis would have a purple spore mass. Next, we have got submitted by Jim Dyer. If you guys have been out in the woods, you have probably seen some of these. They've been up for a bit now. They can be quite large. And this one isn't really showing some of the classic signs that you can see in the blackening. And so this is actually a large polypore, can sometimes be confused with hen of the woods. This one tends to come up a little bit earlier. It has much larger fronds and usually isn't quite as dark. And if you handle it, it's not a quick bruiser, but over time it will stain black. You might even see a little bit up here. There's like a bug bit this. So this is probably a bug bite, and it's actually starting to turn black. This is Merypilus sumstanii, black staining polypore. All right, here's one submitted by Douglas Miller. He found this at Loch Raven, and I'm sure probably everybody on this call has seen something like this, has seen these out in the woods. Kind of big, white, knobbly brackets growing on fallen logs or stumps and things. So this is actually one of the Trametes. This is Trametes gibbosa. We used to call it a couple of different things, but I think they've settled that this is actually gibbosa. They call it the lumpy bracket. If you look at the undersurface, the pores are not circular. They're kind of elongated. It's not necessarily maze-like, but they're certainly not circular. And sometimes it'll get some kind of mossy algae, something growing on the surface too. And so it'll start becoming discolored green over time. Very common. They're pretty tough and leathery and can get pretty hard once they get older and dry out. All right, another one submitted by Douglas. So this is a big guy, all white. You can see there's some little spines up here. When I first looked at it, and if you see this shot over here, you can see it's got free gills, so the gills don't go all the way to the stipe. And with this large mushroom, I was like, well, there's no veil. That's kind of odd. But then if you take a look at that little guy sitting next to it, well, it does have a veil. It's just kind of fallen away. So I'm thinking this is definitely one of the Lepidella amanitas. So it may be Amanita cochrae. Cochrae tends to have kind of these pointy little warts, which are the remnants of the universal veil. So when amanitas are young, they have a coating over the whole thing. Sometimes it's a membranous sac, sometimes it's powdery, sometimes it's just a tissue. And as Thomas was explaining, as the cap expands, the pileus underneath that universal veil tissue expands, and that universal veil tissue can just kind of spread apart. And so that's where you get these warts. Of course, sometimes you get the membrane where it stays at the base, kind of like it came out of a snake egg or a turtle egg. But anyway, there's quite a few of these lepidellas. A lot of times they kind of have a different smell. So that can kind of help you, lead you in the right direction. Kokery tends to have a more bulbous base than this. So I may be wrong there, but it's something along those lines. All right, you guys have probably seen these in your mulch, whether it's at work or at home. Michelle Holtzman found this one. You can see it's got this kind of tissue covering when it's young, and so that's protecting these little eggs that are in the nest until they mature. And then it breaks away, and you can see it's got these little eggs which contain the spores. And these are designed to use raindrops to splatter out the eggs. The eggs even have like a little fiber on them. And so when they squirt out, if it like hits a blade of grass or something, it can wrap around and hold it up. So that way it's elevated up off the ground. So these are one of the bird's nest fungi. This is Cyathus striatus, and you can see that the inside of that nest there. It's got those striations, and it tends to have that kind of furry, scurfy outside to it. They call it the fluted bird's nest. All right, this was submitted by David Lee. I'm not the best at boletes, but I tried looking this one up. I thought this distinct yellow would have really helped, but he also had some pictures of other ones. I didn't fit them in that were a bit darker brown. You can see this beautiful red pore layer and the nice blue staining. It's even staining where it's bruised on the cap tissue, and it looks like on the stipe tissue as well. I believe this may be Boletus subvolutipes, and he said that he tried a bit, just a small portion, and said that he ate it with no issues. And some books may indicate this is toxic. And if you remember the bolete talk we had not long ago, we were told that maybe some of these are more idiosyncratic reactions with some of this edibility of boletes. I tend to be a little bit more wary, but it is good to only eat a small portion if you are going to try something for the first time. All right, another one submitted by David Lee. This is, we've seen quite a few of these recently. This is a little browner than it can be. It might just be the lighting, but sometimes this can be very red. The pore surface looks almost pimpled. And so this is actually the beefsteak polypore. This is Fistulina hepatica. One cool thing about this one is most like boletes and polypores and things, their pores are all interconnected. And these, if you were to look close and kind of trying to crack open or pull apart the pores, they'll actually split apart because it's actually not connected. It's actually a series of tons and tons of little tubes, like little straws hanging down, and that's where the spores are produced. This is actually an edible and is one of the few that you can actually eat raw as well. Another submitted by David. So this may look a little like, oh, okay, just a kind of a brown mushroom with a furry top on it. But one thing that kind of helps to distinguish this one is if you look here, it's got these bands happening on the stipe. So if I didn't put a zoomed in picture, but the gills should be attached. If you were to take a spore print, it would be rusty. This is a mycorrhizal species. Now, I believe this is one of the banded quartz. I put armillatus on here, but armillatus is associated with birch. I can't tell with just a photo and not knowing if that's actually what it's growing around. But that's definitely a possibility. But there are a few other species that also have this banding, and sometimes knowing where they're growing, whether it's conifers or birch, and sometimes locality and stuff might help you to distinguish to a species that looks similar but has a different associate. Another submitted by David, and I think a lot of you probably recognize this guy. These can be relatively common. There's a few different species. I know when I first started, I had a hard time distinguishing which was which. They have one that kind of has a noodly appearance, and it doesn't have any zonation. And so if you were to look closely at these, they have like almost like a lined zonation along each of the fronds. These you can see looks like they're growing in mixed forest, so it would be hard to distinguish which one they're growing, which trees they're associating with or growing with. But this is probably Spiraceus spathulata, one of the cauliflower fungi. This is an edible as well. And the one I found was the noodly type, which I think they've put into Spiraceus americana. It used to be Spiraceus crispa. And that was quite a tasty mushroom. This one's pretty cool. This was submitted by April Wyman. I wasn't too sure when I first got it. And I started to realize, okay, well, it's got this purplish, rosy, pinkish kind of coloration. Looks, the gills look a bit Mycena-like. And so I think this actually might be Mycena pura, the lilac bonnet. I believe I don't know if it's a variety or a different species, but it's like Mycena rosea. But that might just be synonymous with pura. One thing that this is one that would have been good to give this guy a whiff, because this mushroom, if that's what it is, would have smelled like radish. This is actually one of the toxic Mycenas, though. A couple more submitted by April. You can see we've got a big bolete here. It's got kind of this purpley brown cap with a lighter stipe. This was the only photo she submitted, so kind of hard to tell if there's any staining reactions, but there are a few in this group of this kind of brown topped Tylopolis type mushrooms. One thing that would be good to do if you find something like this, give it a little nibble, and you can spit that out, and you'll kind of get an idea of the taste. I suspect this is probably bitter. I think this might be Tylopolis rubibruneus. And there's some that can look similar, but they'll be mild. And so giving it a taste of some of your mushrooms, I wouldn't recommend nibbling on amanitas, even though they say, you shouldn't get enough toxin, but still. If if it's a bolete or a russula or a lactarius, there are quite a few that are pretty safe to nibble on and spit out. This other one here, you guys may have seen in the past, and it's kind of cool that she's got this this other mushroom growing here next to it. So this pink guy right here is Phlebia incarnata. They call it the coral pink Marulius. And I'm not sure if there's actually been any studies done, but actually we had this one last month too. And it's got this Sterium ostrea growing on the same log, and sometimes it's growing right out from the Sterium. So maybe it's parasitizing that mycelium in there. I'm not certain, but it kind of looks that way, doesn't it? Another by April. I'm surprised we hadn't seen more of these. This is usually a very common mushroom that we get a lot of here. This is kind of a perennial mushroom. It'll grow that white surface. You can see it looks pretty old and funky on the top, but then this white undersurface is quite fresh and new. Some of that might also have to do with the fact that the spores tend to fall and kind of go over and land back on the cap. So it kind of gives it a dusty appearance. This is actually the artist conch. This is Canoderma applanatum. And so this is the one where if you kind of scratch that white surface, it's dark underneath, and people will draw pictures and you can kind of dry it out. And, you know, it kind of preserves your artistry if you have that inclination. All right, this one's submitted by Felix. And I believe this is Tapenella atrotomentosa. The problem is I can't really see the stipe here. And these were the only photos. So Felix, if you're listening, feel free to, or others, if you're going to submit some pictures, feel free to pull those leaves away. And that way you can get a better view of that stipe. This probably would have been growing on an old conifer log because that's typically what they like to grow on. I don't see any conifer leaves, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an old log laying there. So anyway, I think that's what this one is. Oh yeah, and they used to, since it used to be Paxillus, they called it the velvet foot pax, but I guess we should start calling it the velvet foot tap now since it's a tapenella. Okay, so I can't see her last name. Isabella, sorry, it's blocked off. But if anybody knows what this says, please tell me what it is. So I found this quite a few times, and I think 6, 7, maybe even 8 years ago, I found it and I identified it, and I found it somewhere, whether it was in a book or online. It's like a blackish polypore. It's kind of leathery. So it's not like your rosy polypore. Fomitopsis cangere kind of can look similar to this, except it has like, it's more of a thick shell, more clamshell shaped, and it's kind of hard and woody. This one's actually kind of leathery, and it has like a pinkish, almost purpley hue. And I've seen it covering logs, and it's pretty large, but I'm not sure what this one is, but I kind of like it, and I did figure out the name a long time ago, and I've since forgotten. So if anybody knows, feel free to shoot me an email or a text or a chat or whatever. Anyway, I thought it was cool. I should put it in there. All right, here's a big glob of a mushroom submitted by Marilyn Dean Mendel. Kind of nondescript until you flip it over, say, oh, okay, well, I know what that is. Look at those teeth growing there. And you can see the stipe better there. So this is one of your hedgehogs. This is Hydnum propandum, most likely. And they can grow pretty big, and this is a tasty mushroom. The spores are developed on these teeth instead of gills. These are kind of in the same grouping as chanterelles, and they kind of have that same matte appearance on the top and kind of gross stature. Anyway, they're quite tasty. So Marilyn,
so we should probably wrap it up soon.
I've got like 2 more. I can go through this. Okay, so everybody knows what this one is. This is another one from Marilyn. You can see this is chicken of the woods, got the yellow undersurface. So this is Latiparus sulphureus. We've also got this one. This is, I would like to talk about that one, but that's okay. This is your aborted entaloma. This is actually growing with honey mushrooms and the entaloma abortivum, which kind of makes these aborted forms. And the last one, I believe this was an enthalotus ludens, a jack-o'-lantern, but this is kind of like this, because of the pictures, I couldn't tell if this was shading, this was fibrils. So this is kind of the limits of trying to do this ID with photography. It could be a ringless honey, but I can't tell with that. If I would have had it in my hand, I probably could have seen better features and been able to give her a better idea. But it is October, so let's call it a jack-o'-lantern. And I just thought it was kind of cool that if we had a lobster mushroom, we'd have a full surf and turf tonight. Anyway, thanks everybody for the submissions.